The first panel is called Adaptation for Online Learning. Adaptation for Online Learning. And the subtitle, or the title of our first presentation is called Unapologetically Learning Together, Adapting Production and Design Curriculum to a Virtual Stage. And it's a recorded presentation by Michael Bergmann, Caroline O'Brien and Bonnie Thomson from Ryerson University in Canada. Now, I wasn't going to actually read out the full biogs, but as we've got a little more time, I think I'm going to, just because I think it's quite interesting and something that might come up later in discussion. So Michael he describes himself as a techno-optimist and enjoys exploring new approaches to storytelling by mixing theatre, dance, installation, robots, video games, and virtual and augmented reality. He teaches on the faculty at the School of Performance at the Creative School in Toronto, Canada, and teaches on the MFA in Design at Yale School of Drama. And the reason I'm quite interested in sharing these biogs with you in full is because I think it starts to demonstrate the range of skills of those teaching in this field at the moment. Joining him on the presentation is Caroline O'Brien, who's Associate Professor in Costume Design and Production and Chair of the School of Performance, I imagine in Toronto. O'Brien's research focuses on design processes in costume practice and the use of costume in training professional dancers. She contributed to Luce Iragare's Building a New World for Palgrave and the Oxford Handbook to Contemporary Ballet in 2021. In addition, Bonnie Thomson, who's one of the presenters, works at the as Associate Technical Director and is an instructor with the School of Performance. She's also freelances in a variety of technical and administrative capacities, such as production and stage management, technical direction, front of house management, puppet and prop building, and arts education. And I just think it's extraordinary, this range of skills, and we're going to see how these kind of work together in the first presentation. So Michael and Bonnie will be here on the panel to discuss with us all later, but for now I think if I can go over to you, Lair, if we could have a look at the first presentation. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Michael Bergmann, Assistant Professor of Performance at the Creative School in Toronto, Canada. I'm joined by Caroline O'Brien, Chair of Performance, and Bonnie Thomson, our Associate Technical Director at the school. We are honored to be a part of this panel and to have the opportunity to share what we have learned this year. Caroline will start us off with some background of the school and our program, and then I'll go into what technological challenges we worked on throughout this year. And finally, Bonnie will give a case study of one show in particular. So first, I'll pass it off to Caroline.
Thanks so much for having us in the symposium at the University of the Arts London for this discussion about how we fared during a year of the COVID pandemic. And thanks to Michael Bergmann and Bonnie Thomson for sharing your thoughts here as well. My portion of the presentation addresses who we are and what we do in the School of Performance at the Creative School in Toronto. In the school, students pursue a BFA in acting, dance, or production. In offering conservatory training, we often describe ourselves as a theatre company with an academic problem and an academic program with a theatre problem. We're constantly trying to revise how we adapt and understand those two things. By conservatory, we mean rigorous professional training with a focus on the art. Our faculty all have extensive professional experience and ongoing direct and practical knowledge of the industry. We offer individual attention and feedback to each student and encourage collaborative opportunities with like-minded emerging artists who share with one another a passion and commitment to learning. Our location in the center of Toronto is on the doorstep of some of the best commercial and not-for-profit performance opportunities, and we are constantly engaging with professionals who work in theatre, dance, film, television, and corporate events. Our work is about the ephemeral world of live performance and how it usually calls upon a kind of bravery and courage that makes us really vulnerable as human beings, yet feeds our passion to collaborate in a creative realm. Our students are talented emerging artists from diverse backgrounds across Canada and around the world. We have focused classes in several streams: scenic and costume design, lighting, sound, and projection, props and scenic painting, stage and production management. All of these engage creative and critical thinking and collaboration. Courses are taught by working artists and teachers with direct connections to the industry. Our graduates are thoughtful collaborators who are empowered to become the next generation of change makers and leaders in the arts and culture sector. We nourish an environment where courage, hard work, and risk-taking empower students to become their best human and artist selves. Some of our learning outcomes, as we talk about them in the school, are about innovation and adaptation, how these are always possible, how students can guide technical innovation, and how flexibility is key in a collaborative learning environment as we generate new knowledge and understanding. We became more eager to commit to an online experience as we became more accustomed to it. And after the shock of the first few months of the pandemic wore off, and we realized that the initial stay-at-home guideline was not going away, everyone made a strong commitment to the inevitability of virtual learning and a virtual season. Usually, we're found at the corner of Gould and Yonge Street in the Student Learning Centre on the university campus in downtown Toronto. And this year, we found ourselves spread across the world in our various living rooms and bedrooms and offices at home, learning how to communicate with one another in new ways, which sometimes meant a lot more listening. And so I could ask again, what is performance at the Creative School? We're much more than a proscenium stage, although we have a proscenium stage. We are much more than historical costumes, although we learn and teach about historical costuming. We are pushing the technological boundaries of performance all the time. And the pandemic has pushed us to react quickly and embrace emerging technologies all at once. So we have tried to be on the leading edge of these technologies as we have found them available. We've used foundational skills and applied them in the studios and classes that we held this year in this changing medium. We are not broadcast. There are other programs for that. Rather, we thrive in person with a live audience. We continue to imagine the ways that we maintain our relationships to the audience, and we focus on a very deliberate, how can we come back better? So we're not looking for a return to normal, rather a comeback better. And we seek ways to create the future that we want. So I'm going to hand it over to Michael to share some of what we did this year.
Thanks, Caroline. So as Caroline mentioned, we did a lot this year, and we continue to have a full season. I'm going to take you very quickly over a bit of that. Also, on the last slide of this presentation, there'll be a link to our school's page where you can have a look at all these shows in much more depth. But I want to briefly talk about overall what our season was and what happened this year starting in the fall. Fall for Dance North is a really beautiful opportunity for us. It's an international dance festival that came to Toronto about 7 years ago. And one of the primary mandates is to make dance accessible to a wide audience. So last summer, we had the opportunity to make a film, and dancers across the country were involved. This dancer you see here is in Calgary, and you'll recognize the shot if you have an opportunity to see the film. Richard III was a Shakespeare project that was done as a live broadcast radio play. Dances is our dance students working with choreographers creating dance on film, and that was put together as a festival of 4 different pieces. Clown was also done as a live performance with a live audience in Zoom, and because of the format of Clown, that interactivity with the audience was a critical component to it. The production panel was a bit of a talk-back opportunity for our students to review the semester at that point and talk about what they worked on and how that went. And we're touching on some of the same topics here today. Love and Information was our large 4th-year project for the fall. It was presented as a film with individual scenes recorded live over Zoom. Speaking to the nature of the kind of Zoom environment that we're in, this piece by Carol Churchill talks about technology at its very heart and how it's an integral aspect in our lives. So it was a very appropriate choice to look at for this kind of a format. Moving into the winter, Semi-Precious Semaphore was a dance project, again, done between dancers here and in Vancouver on film. I'm really skimming over these quickly, so please, like I said, dig into the website and some of the material is still available on there. New Voices is a festival of new work generated by our 4th-year graduating class of actors. And it had 2 components, a live showing of some of the pieces that they created, and then a separate presentation about some of the other pieces that were created in other various mediums. Before the End was an innovative project with 3rd-year actors, which resulted in a choose-your-own-adventure web experience for the audience, where you can go through the story and learn about the world of the play and make choices upon what path you take to see it. And you can replay that story many times and explore a different thing every time. There was over 10 hours worth of recorded content for that show. It was a creative devised creation project led by Elizabeth Dinkova and using a platform called Adventure, which you see here. Rabbit Hole, Bonnie will talk about a little bit later on. The Choreographic Film Festival, this is the dancer's own choreographic work. And again, this was composed as a film festival of individual pieces. There were a total of 106 different pieces that were showcased over 3 nights. And finally, Create is our 4th-year production students showcasing their capstone independent study projects. So pretty full season. I'm going to talk about some of the technological challenges and changes that we came across. Again, we were not emulating what we did in person. We took the skills and the idea and the philosophies that we gained from our experience working in person and said, what are not necessarily direct analog tools in a virtual world, but rather, how can we achieve a similar goal in the fundamentals of what we're going for? For example, our production students in person would be controlling the lights and controlling the look of the stage. In this case, we're controlling lighting in the actors' rooms by remotely controlling their lighting or their cameras and using streaming software like OBS to change the visual world that the audience is experiencing this way. Instead of using a ClearComm communication system in person, we used the platform Discord. And Discord became kind of our shared communication system, both with the actors on some channels and our directors on some channels, and also as our backstage communication channel. Scheduling and management actually weren't impacted very much. We use Basecamp as our management system for our shows and Google Sheets extensively. And that really hasn't changed. We just didn't have the paper analog that went along with it. But fundamentally, our way of working wasn't very different. Some things that you see in some of the shows, props, costume choices, the design aspect of it, came down to what's in your home and how do we utilize that best rather than buying something new or building something. How do we elevate the performers and empower them to make changes to their existing environment? Physically, scenically, costume-wise with props, all of this guided by our production and design students. And lastly, of course, the big one was internet connectivity. And this was probably our largest challenge and the biggest point of accessibility issues as well. Time of day was definitely a factor, especially for students within Toronto and in shared AirNet situations. Some of that was solved by delivering hotspots to people and creative scheduling, figuring out what times of day had the best opportunities for people that had challenges with internet connection. And with services like Speedify, which helps to bond together multiple connections to provide failover options. And it was different in cases when we were doing a live stream versus broadcasting a remotely recorded performance. That is actually one of the choke points, the fact that everything had to come back together into one system at this point and then to be broadcast out to the audience. And this was running through OBS and then oftentimes streamed out to YouTube or Twitch or other channels. This is an example of the setup that I was running on my system, which was that choke point of all these streams coming together to one place. So our next goal to work on is how do we build redundancy into that system so that it doesn't all come down to one system and thus also one internet connection. But nonetheless, it worked for now. Fundamentally, the main thing that hasn't changed is that experiential learning is still the core of our training at the school and for our students. This is a photo of Elle, a now finished third-year production student running the clown show from their home in Newfoundland. And while that clown show is happening live with a live audience over Zoom in communication with each other, you can see that they have multiple devices running there to have all that work together. And at the heart of it, we're still about this hands-on creation, discovery, and execution. Just the medium has changed a little bit. Peer and instructor feedback and engagement throughout that process hasn't changed. That's still done the same way. We still do reflective discussions, what's working, what's not, what we should change, the start, stop, change approach throughout the process. And we're constantly reevaluating the parameters as the world shifted. Things changed day to day, week to week, shifting what was possible, what we thought was possible, and we adapted and it still came together. And so we say we are unapologetically learning together. We're not pretending that we have the answers. This is a new medium for everyone involved. And that's the guidance that we're providing. And we're learning from the students just as much. So now I'll pass over to Bonnie to talk about Rabbit Hole, one of the most exciting shows that we did this season.
We were really excited by what we were still able to achieve with the restrictions that the pandemic imposed. I want to give an overview of one of the projects we did, which was Rabbit Hole. I'll start with the show description as given to us by the playwright. Rabbit Hole is a deep dive into the world of streaming culture, cancel and apology culture, voyeurism, and social capital, following a trail of gaming, IRL, and music streamers down an endless pursuit of meaning, authenticity, and grace in the world virtually defined by their very absence. So the first thing that was very successful in this project was we really embraced the format available to us. We made sure that we weren't trying to convert a play that really need to be done in person to a virtual experience, which meant creating a project that lived unapologetically in this medium, in this case from scratch. We were trying to recreate the root of what worked in person, which meant a pretty big deep dive into the underlying learning objectives and some pretty serious self-reflection, some of which happened in advance, some of which is much more apparent looking back. How did we do it? Well, we consulted with some experts. We found a wonderful team of people. David Yee is a Canadian playwright, Ninalia Aquino, who was the artistic director of Factory Theatre, and Michelle Ramsey, who's a lighting and production designer and design mentor. And they were our core guest artists in working to help us create something that was meant to be in this medium so that we could bring in all of the elements that we wanted to put together. We also consulted with a professional technical director and stage manager who had successfully achieved a live performance online. We really did want this experience to be live, and we made sure we were working with artists who also held that as a priority. In terms of putting our student team together, we built in a lot of positive redundancy, and we met people where they were, one of the reasons for larger than usual teams and flexible role descriptions. In many cases, we had an outline for a job description that we collectively added to, including the students, as we progressed through the production, and we made different discoveries about what was really needed as opposed to what we had assumed in advance or what we were used to in a typical environment. It also helped with the pandemic factors of internet and living space variability and, of course, Zoom fatigue. We also typically utilize a lot of peer mentoring, and larger teams meant more opportunities to keep that system, which is one of our mainstays, in place. We had 38 production students, 14 site-specific scenes, 20 performers, a theater that we had to create virtually from scratch, and a firm, extreme commitment to creating live production that not only provided an opportunity for students to explore this medium, but also really gave them the chance to work on the equivalent skills that they would be using if we were gathered in a theater together. We ran a live show where everything you saw on screen was actually happening in real time. Lighting changes, audio effects, video overlays, live effects that the actors were doing. We had some blood effects, we had some special effects, entrances, exits. All of it happened in real time, which was one of the principles we really wanted to hang on to. To bring that live element in as much as possible and visual continuity that we wanted, the world had to make sense, which is where design students really had an opportunity to shine, looking at where everybody was, how we could create something within the frame that we could see to actually reflect the world we wanted to represent together. There was no pre-recorded content, and operationally, different students were contributing to live operations based on cueing from the stage manager. We still had the same call and response system that we would have had in the theater. We just substituted a Zoom room for the stage, Discord for our headsets and backstage communication, and instead of that proscenium, we used OBS streaming to Twitch for the actual theater so our audience could have a look at exactly what we wanted them to see. All of this meant we ran into a lot of issues and creative solutions. Actors and production students' internet and connectivity was a huge issue, which we had to work to solve together, and meant a lot of mailed Ethernet cables. We have an image actually of someone digging a hole, one of the scenes that was written for someone's backyard, and there were a lot more complications than why don't we just mail the actor a shovel and have him dig a hole. There are a lot of things associated with what was essentially the stage version of burying a body. A lot of interesting health and safety considerations. In the same way that we would do stunt planning for something in person that was high risk, we had to do a lot of stunt planning to achieve this sort of 5-minute scene, but all of it virtually. We couldn't actually go to Quinn's house and help him dig the hole. We had to coach him through a virtual medium. We had him set up a laptop so we could actually see what he was doing. Lighting and daylight was a big factor for us, and how do we control the natural light, and when the show needed to be to actually get the effects we wanted. We debated using presets only or trying to have live lighting changes during the show, which we did manage but used sparingly. But it was important to us that our lighting and audio students had the opportunity to help shape the environment and get the chance to participate in cueing different looks and effects live during the performance. Another successful strategy was creating one big virtual Zoom space that represented the theater and having a series of breakout rooms for different activities. Students would all join the same space throughout the day and move into designated spaces, but you always knew you could drop by the theater and find someone working. And we kept as much hands-on discovery as we could still put in. We consulted a bunch of experts, our through creative team that we brought in to mentor the project. We talked with Tarragon Theatre about how they were doing their virtual projects to pull in some of their ideas. We were as communicative and flexible as we could be. We created very large student teams and let some of the rules evolve. And we made discoveries together. We had to make a lot of adjustments during, so we all, including staff and faculty, parked our egos at the door. We didn't necessarily know the answers, we discovered them together. And we worked with the students and created that alignment whenever we could. And while we were unapologetically present in this medium, I think we really joined our students in curiosity. We didn't have the answers a lot of the time. This was so new to all of us. And due to the nature of the work that we already do, we're pretty comfortable with that. But we do know what questions to ask, and that's a great place to start. And we were lucky enough to have a generous team to work with together on answering those questions, resulting in a really spectacular and satisfying live performance and a valuable learning experience.
Thanks, Bonnie. So I will leave with with 3 takeaways that we want to end on. First, that innovation and adaptation are always possible. We discovered that it's not the same, but that these new experiences are just as valuable. We really can deliver this training in a different way, and letting our students guide our technological innovation by being open to what their suggestions are and then experimenting within those has been very valuable. And of course, flexibility. We mourn the loss of the things that were and that we really loved about how we work together. But at the same time, we're really excited about new opportunities and new things that we've learned this way and how we can bring those back into our practice moving forward and to come back better than we were before. I'll leave you with our contact information. Please reach out to us, and we're happy to be sharing and continuing this conversation with you all and to be part of this community. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Michael, Bonnie and Caroline. I mean, masses. It's exhausting actually just watching the amount of work that you've managed to achieve. I think there'll be many questions and much discussion around that. I'm very interested in the way that your insistence on the live event and things can go wrong and that sense of danger that theatre generates, and how you develop that with on-screen events. I'm also to talk to you about depth and how you work with lighting designers and people when you're actually looking at a screen. But we'll come to those discussion points later on. I think we'll move straight on. So we haven't got Claire Carolyn here, unfortunately, but we have got, which is great, we've got Kelly Zezulka, I hope I'm saying that correctly, Zezulka, who is from the University of Salford in Manchester. And her presentation is called Advanced Design for the Theatre, a Pandemic Case Study. And again, just to give you a little bit of the of Kelly's biog, and again, this multidisciplinary thing seems to be to the fore. Kelly is a lecturer in technical theatre at the University of Salford. Her research interests include theatre design, pedagogy, technical rehearsals, interactional sociolinguistics, creativity and collaboration. And she's also interested in backstage spaces, places and processes. She is a practicing lighting designer and is a non-executive director of the Association of Lighting Designers and editor of its bi-monthly magazine, Focus. So it's very interesting to see how these new media that we're creating, how this new work is how this works with lighting design. So I think if we can move straight away to Kelly's presentation, please, Leah. And then we'll go on to the discussion.
The BA Hons Technical Theatre Production and Design course at the University of Salford is now 3 years old. Our first third-year cohort will graduate this summer. Our third-year Advanced Design for the Theatre module, therefore, ran for the first time during the pandemic, from September 2020 to January 2021. Our students study a wide range of theatre production and design subjects across the 3 years of their degree: lighting, sound and video, set and costume design, stage and production management, theatre history and critical analysis, with the opportunity to apply these skills and knowledge to practical project work in every term. The Advanced Design for the Theatre module builds on Intro to Design in the first year and Design for Theatre in the second year. At each stage, students are required to demonstrate skills in research, craft, presenting, and critical and reflective thinking and writing. As module leader, I was responsible for designing the specifics of this course, a process I began over the summer of 2020. This was a course complicated by the UK government's ever-shifting response to the pandemic. The UK had been in lockdown since the 20th of March, and restrictions began to be eased in June and July. At the start of term in September, the northwest of England, where Salford is located in Greater Manchester, was faced with new local restrictions in response to a growing number of coronavirus cases. The area was placed under Tier 3 restrictions from the 20th of October, with another national lockdown beginning in early November. The first 8 weeks of the module, therefore, were a peculiar blend of online, in-person, synchronous and asynchronous teaching depending on the activity, the space available, and the current state of the national and local restrictions. Additionally, some in-person sessions were also held simultaneously online, as some students needed to self-isolate. 2 sessions were taught by a professional set and costume designer, and these were also held online as she formed the support bubble for her vulnerable parents. Designing this module clearly had its challenges, but as nothing had previously existed for this module, this actually opened up opportunities for flexibility and innovation in the way the material was presented, discussed, and critiqued, and how students would be assessed. The module specification included the following information. So these are the aims of the module and the intended learning outcomes, which I won't read, but I'll leave up just for you to have a quick read through, and I'll scroll down as well. So this was all the information I had to start with in designing this module as module leader. The module was timetabled for 3 sessions a week: Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, and Friday afternoon. Some of these were self-directed. Students were given tasks to complete and were then required to post on Blackboard, our virtual learning environment, using the discussion forums that I included in each week's folder. More on this in a second. The material for each week was laid out as follows. Each week contained the following pages. Preparation. These were materials to be read or watched before the session on Thursday, and this information related directly to material that we covered in synchronous sessions. The synchronous sessions were 1 session on Thursday plus the Friday afternoon. We had access to the theatre on Thursday mornings and a design studio on Thursday afternoons, and it was up to me how we used these spaces. Typically, one was for synchronous seminars and the other for self-directed work. This varied from week to week. This was about 3 hours on a Thursday and then 1 hour on a Friday. There was information for a workshop or self-directed task. These were for the workshop sessions on Thursdays. This gave students some initial guidance, and then they had the rest of the time to work on their practical projects. There was a discussion forum. These were posted from week 3 onwards, and students were meant to be contributing to these as much as possible. This is where they could post their research, sketches, CAD drawings, etc., as well as any questions that they might have had. They were also encouraged to comment on their peers' work here as well. This would take them anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour a week. And then any additional resources, so this was just any other watching or reading material that I thought was useful. So now that you have some context for the module, I just want to pick out a few things that I'm going to discuss in more detail, 3 successes, and 1 thing that didn't work so well, which I'm going to change for this autumn. So the first 3 are access to free or cheap online theatre, engagement with industry professionals, and employability. The thing that I'd like to change, however, is assessment deadlines and feedback. Week 2's session was entitled The Politics of Sonography. As preparation for this session, students were asked to engage with Rosie May L. Niles' online scenographic installation, Prayer. According to the website of the Gate Theatre, which commissioned the work, Prayer was not going to be a set, but an environment, filled with plants and life, a space in which we could collectively imagine something unknown or something impossible. It's against design as a polished, finished product. It's against perfectionism. Instead, it's a sharing of thoughts about set design. Prayer has grown into an online interactive sharing, a look at the process and the thinking behind the concept. So although their final design projects for this module will be based around the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester, this early viewing of an online performance piece really challenged the ways in which students saw and engaged with space and place. We followed this with a discussion of design as a political act, particularly with regard to the positionality of the designer and scenographer. This also led very effectively into the following week's discussion of the assigned playtext, Blasted by Sarah Kane. In week 5, our explorations turned to objects and materials. As preparation, students were asked to choose one of the tabletop Shakespeare productions by Forced Entertainment to watch. The company essentially reimagined and retold all of Shakespeare's plays, a different one each evening, using household items to stand in for the characters. These were then moved around by a single actor who narrated the action. These were available free online through the UCLA Center for the Art of Performance website. Students were free to choose which of the 5 specified performances they wanted to watch, thus giving them some autonomy of choice and flexibility. In other circumstances, this would probably have been a group outing to a local theatre, which, among other things, would have been logistically complex and certainly not free. So next I'll talk about engagement with industry professionals. We were so lucky that we had already been in discussions with Simon Curtis, the former head of production at the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester, about working more closely together, and this module gave us the perfect opportunity to cement that relationship. Simon provided ground plans, sections, and tech specs for all 3 of the Exchange's spaces, the main space, the studio, and the foyer, all of which the students were encouraged to explore. But more than this, his support and guidance was instrumental in helping the students understand the space and the many ways in which it could be used. I won't go into it now, but if you are unfamiliar with the theatre, do have a look. It's the picture I've got on the screen now. It's a beautiful, but potentially dauntingly unique space. Due to COVID, a site visit wasn't possible, but with Simon's guidance, the students were able to easily visualize the space through working with plans, drawings, and photographs. We were also indebted to sound designer Gareth Owen, who delivered 2 workshops on sound design, as well as Roy Beaton from the Association of Lighting Designers, who spoke to students about the ALD's awards and how to put together an award-winning portfolio, useful for their second assessment. Which brings me nicely on to employability. Employability is one of our school's key strategic priorities and something we have specifically been asked to embed in all of our modules where possible. In the case of Advanced Design for Theatre, this happened at several points throughout the term. In week 2, students were asked to begin thinking about their online presence by viewing and analysing other designers' online portfolios. They then used this to start thinking about what kind of designer they are, what impression would they like people to leave their site with, what is the key information that their online portfolio would need to impart to a visitor, and how would they be able to do this most effectively. Of course, this is also important in our work as sonographers, and this discussion thus served a dual purpose. In week 8, students presented their white card models via a virtual showing. This meant we could be easily joined by industry professionals who wouldn't otherwise have been able to journey to Manchester in person, and this gave the students both a range of feedback, so not just mine or their peers, but some professional contacts with which to follow up. I'm grateful here to Simon Curtis, David Holmes, Fifi Thorsteinsen, Mark Shields, and Mark Wright, who joined us all the way from the United States. For the second assessment, which was a design portfolio, Students were encouraged to submit this as a web page that either formed or was part of their professional website. The idea here was that students would be able to not just use the assessment work for university purposes, but that they would thus finish the module with a fully developed website, already populated with design examples to send to potential employers. Which leads us on to our virtual industry event. This was held on the final day of term at 5 p.m. on Zoom. This was attended by all the students and module staff, as well as approximately 40 industry professionals from all disciplines. Students could also invite friends and family if they wished. In the weeks leading up to the event, I put together this website based on information students had supplied via a template, and this website was sent out in advance of the event for people to engage with and explore. The event itself was split into 3 breakout rooms on Zoom, 1 for each group, and attendees were free to move between rooms, much like at an in-person event. The obvious advantage to this setup was that people from all over the UK and the world could attend. We also had people from Europe and from the US, again providing students with wider networking opportunities. So just to give you an idea of what went into making this website and what information I asked the students for, this was the template that I sent out to them to fill in. And you can see it's got basic stuff at the start, but also links to their professional pages. And again, this was part of the kind of employability that was embedded within this module. Also, we talked about things like social media profiles, making sure that they had a professional one versus a personal one, or that they were comfortable with potential employers seeing posts on their personal profile. So I asked them to give me links to their professional website, but also if they'd created a separate website for their portfolio for Blasted. Then I asked them just to write a really light-hearted 150 words about who they are, what they enjoy doing, just a chance for potential employers to kind of get to know who they were as people. And this was separate from their design inspiration and from their design concept. And I said that they could take this from anything that they'd already written for either one of their assessments, so either from their research portfolio, which was part of assessment 1, or from their design portfolio, which was assessment 2, and really thinking about what it is that they wanted to get into those 200 and 300 words. Obviously, images and video were quite important. We also had some students doing sound design. So I did say to them that they could send me sound files. So everything had to be hosted externally, just so I could just really quickly paste a link in. I asked them to send me images separately via WeTransfer or OneDrive or Google Drive, whatever. Again, so that those were high-res images that could be pasted into the website. And of course, I asked for captions as well, so I knew what they were. And then finally, I asked for names and email addresses of at least 2 professional contacts that they would like to invite to the event. The students were concurrently doing a production management module, which miraculously we managed to get students on work placements with theatre companies and event companies in and around Manchester. So they all had at least 2 professional contacts from their production management work experience that they could invite. And I kind of left it up to them who they wanted to invite. So I'll just show you really quickly one of the groups from our industry website. So this was group 2. Every group follows a similar format, so you can see where all that information from the template comes into play here. This group was Sarah, Macaulay, and Nell. And you can see that they've got, particularly for Sarah here, so she's got a personal website. And then this takes you straight to her design work. And actually that is a picture of her set design for Blasted, which she created for this module. So those are my 3 successes from this module. Briefly, one thing that I will change for next year, which is not necessarily pandemic related, although it's possibly exacerbated by the situation. The assessment deadlines were within 10 days of each other right at the end of term. My thinking here was that I would provide the students with as much time as possible to complete what were 2 rather hefty assessments. However, when marking assessment 2, it became apparent that students would have benefited from the chance to use the feedback from assessment 1, and with the 3-week turnarounds that we worked to as standard for feedback, this wasn't possible. Next term, Assessment 1 will be due before the Christmas break, which also gives students more time to concentrate solely on the final design portfolio. So overall, this was a challenging and at times frustrating module to run, given the constantly moving goalposts as a result of the pandemic. However, the circumstances forced us to challenge, in particular, how we engaged with each other and with the wider industry, and I think this was ultimately really successful.
Hello again. Thank you very much, Kelly, for that fascinating insight into the whole sort of process of that work. We have Michael up on screen. We have Kelly there. Hi. Bonnie should be joining us, as well as our other conveners, I hope. And we now have the opportunity for a Q&A with our participants. We're actually, I think, exactly 20 minutes ahead of schedule. So we're kind of on schedule if we had another presentation, but we haven't. So we're in a kind of quite a relaxed situation. I just want to say, first of all, I've got some specific questions, but I just wanted to make a comment, first of all, which was, I mean, I really admire the kind of, if you like, the pragmatism that's been demonstrated. And I think this is going to be something that we see right across the board, the way people have turned what could potentially be a really difficult situation into something that's kind of become a sort of started sort of new creative endeavors. Really, it's taken everybody into uncharted territory and made everybody have to kind of rethink practices that we've all been taking for granted for a very long time, I suppose. So that's just my comment. My question, first of all, to Michael and Bonnie, but there may be something that Kelly wants to say to that as well, although you're working in a slightly different way, so it may not be pertinent. This notion of liveness and how important that was, and the idea of the accidental and the unplanned and the, you know, can you talk a bit more about that and how you feel you achieved that and how that worked? I think there's going to be a question coming up. I noticed one in the chat actually, but with down the rabbit hole and how those things, I mean, yeah, let you answer that, and then I've got follow-on questions as well, but that's my starter.
Sure. I'll start first. I think it kind of came up as a realization midway through when we were at first kind of struggling to say, okay, what can we do online? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And we were, you know, thinking about projects and seeing that things were becoming basically very much filmmaking, very much broadcast. And we said, well, that's not quite what we're doing. What is it that differentiates us? And I think it really started with the clown show in the fall and the kind of the importance on audience direct interaction and engagement with the performers during that to kind of feed off of each other. And then we really started thinking from that point, what are the other ways for the variety of shows where that liveness, not edited nature is really apparent. And I'll say not every show functioned that way, right? The dance shows were definitely fully pre-recorded and edited and presented as is. Love and Information was fundamentally a film that was where the individual scenes were filmed in person. But I think the shows that we're, you know, the most excited about and the most proud of are the ones that maintain that liveness element to them. Jane, you made a great comment on the danger of it, of kind of feeling that the audience is watching something that, especially right now, especially in the pandemic, where all of our media is being consumed in this way through screens and through a kind of pre-recorded means, having something live is a very strong differentiator. And it's, you know, pedagogically for the actors, it's something very important too, right? That they are performing. They can't take another take. They can't just, you know that it's going to be fixed afterward. They're getting that experience that they would and that training that they would if it was in person, to have to react and to adapt and live, just made even more difficult with the fact that there's no backstage they can run to. There's no person that can fix a costume. There's no and the technological challenges that go along with it. Yeah.
And were the designers, or the lighting designers, were they working live as well? It reminds me of kind of like mixing tape, you know, kind of live gigs where you're actually, were they responding? I mean, I thought for a minute, oh, they're there somehow, because my analog mindset going, oh, they've gone into the rooms and they're adjusting the light. And then I realized, no, they're not going into they're actually doing all this on screen. They've got a screen in front of them, and they're adapting that. So the view that the audience sees has already been mediated by the designers, the lighting designers, and presumably the scenic designers as well.
Yep, exactly. I'll just say, I'll let Bonnie talk about the process of that one specifically on Rabbit Hole, but fundamentally, after March of 2020, none of our students and our staff or faculty ever were in person again until really not even yet, until this fall, right? So it is 100% done in complete isolation in everyone else's spaces, and everything that was not existing there was shipped there. So there was, at no point did our restrictions ever loosen up enough to even have two people in the same room together. So that's, everything was kind of done that way. But yeah, Bonnie.
So the actors were in separate spaces as well.
Except for the ones that already lived together.
Yeah, and that was
a few.
One of the joys of doing a custom built project this way, is that the playwright and the director we were working with could actually take people's situations and turn it into an advantage instead of sort of struggling against it. So they could say, okay, you know, there are 4 of you who already live together. This is your current social safety bubble. You're in the same house. How can we make sure that that's an advantage in the project we're doing? How can we write scenes that are for all of you working together and take advantage? And I think it made the rest of us very envious, right? Because we could watch them pass things to each other. If someone's camera was in the wrong place, someone could walk over and fix it. And then we'd go to another scene, and we'd have those moments where you just want to reach through the screen and help touch something for someone. And instead it was a huge lesson, I think, in patience and in generosity, to figure out how to take that deep breath and say, you know, I'm asking someone to do something that they've never done before, which as educators, we're almost always doing, but we're doing it with an additional level of, and I've never asked anyone to do it in that way before. And so the process for putting together the set visuals design, we actually ended up, for the first part of our pandemic work, we really kept with, we were holding on tight to the things that we knew worked. So we were keeping people's titles, we were keeping people's systems. For the second part, when we took that deep breath and said, okay, if we're here on purpose, we're going to do this for real. And if the students are here, then we're here too. We were a little bit more relaxed on how we define some of those things. So we had a visuals team as opposed to having a set designer and a video designer and a costume designer. We said, all right, you're all people who want this to look the way it looks. And when you can't touch the things anyway, we have to be more collaborative. And I think we redefined that word by the end too. We have to work together in a much different way. And we have to work within what's possible due to the restrictions of the performer in that window. We have to look at the window and their reality in a really unique way. And so we formed this team of video and projection people and costuming people and props and set people and lighting people to all sort of sit together, and we bring the performer in and look at the screen and say, okay, what can we do? What do we love about it? And how can we make it connect to the other pieces? So we had a bunch of medium informal, what we call jam sessions with the production design mentor and the director, saying, all right, what are we thinking? What are we feeling? If this restriction wasn't here, what kinds of things would we put together? And then once we've talked through and played with all those ideas, how do we bring it back into that reality sphere of, well, that's your bedroom wall. That poster can come down, but it's covering up an ugly spot on the wall. Do we want to find a way to use that poster? Do we secretly love that poster? If we light that poster, it's actually pretty good and actually ties in really well with something that might happen in another scene. So how do we create those connection points in a really different way? Not how are we a blank slate and adding things, but how are we taking as much as we've got there and adding and subtracting really strategically with the help of everyone involved to find the connection through line that we really wanted. So we held on to some principles of, we had little LED cubes that we wanted to appear in every scene. We had a couple of other themes. most performers had a tattoo in different places on their bodies that was sometimes visible, sometimes not regularly visible, but helped tie the through line of the story we were telling together. But it was a really interesting, we were struggling at the, we have to have blank and we have to add, and then we realized, no, we have to subtract and negotiate and work within in a way that still actually holds to all the principles of design. And the one that was probably the most challenging for us, honestly, was lighting, because it involved a lot of us saying, okay, well, I can't take my theater apart. I'm not allowed into my theater anyway to send you a bunch of theatrical fixtures. You don't have the right power, you don't have the right control. And you're a performance student who spent 4 years being lit, not doing that lighting. So what can I get you to do? I can get you to unscrew one of the bulbs in your ceiling fixture. I can get you to put a garbage bag over your window. I can ship you a commercial smart bulb, and I can get your home network to hook into another student's network so they can put the lights on and off. And I can play with LED tape in different places to give different glows to and different colors.
So in that extent, everybody's extending their skills base, aren't they? So the actors are learning about lighting, the lighting designers are learning about acting. There's a kind of general sort of, yeah. Let me bring in Kelly, who is a lighting designer, to ask you, thank you very much for your presentation. Do you feel that this has extended the skills base of the students, that they've had to kind of think outside of the kind of conventional box that they would have done if we'd not been working under these conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. There's another module that I worked on at the same time as this advanced design module with the performance students, and they all had to create their own, in small groups, created their own performance work. And again, they were responsible for everything, for the, the kind of scenographics of it, the lighting, the sound, the video. Lots of them picked up new skills as performers that they wouldn't have otherwise had the chance to get involved with or do. And I think at the beginning, a lot of them were really disappointed that they wouldn't be in a theater space and they wouldn't be able to do their projects live and they wouldn't have an audience. But at the end, I think without exception, they all thought, actually, this has been a really valuable experience, and we've learned things that we wouldn't have otherwise had a chance to do. So yeah, I think, with the advanced design module, we were in a slightly different position because we did have some in-person work. We did have access to the theater. We had access to a design studio, at least until week 8 of the module. And then the last 4 weeks were entirely online.
Was that more difficult if you're considering something completely online, it's one thing, isn't it? If you're kind of this word blended learning, which I don't like very much because I don't think it's very blended really. But this idea that you start with one thing and then it's something else, was that more difficult?
Yeah, it was hugely challenging, actually. And because, as I said in my presentation, the kind of goalpost kept shifting from the government. And week to week, we didn't know if we were going to be online or if we were going to be in person, or, if we'd be able to use a certain space, or how many of us would be in a space, or if we had to book another space so that half of us could be in one space while the other half was in another. It was like, just the logistics of it was hugely complicated, and kind of made more so by the uncertainty from the government in terms of, what we were allowed to do and what we weren't allowed to do, but meant that again, a bit like the actors, like as teaching staff, we all became super responsive and super kind of innovative, and constantly thinking of new ways to do things and ways to work within those parameters that we were given. I
think that was definitely the situation we'll identify with that in the UK, people having to switch, roles. I don't want to hold the conversation. I've got loads more questions, but I suspect there might be from Will or Andreas or Peter, and also from the chat, which I'm just going to look at now. So somebody else, if you've got questions, do go in. Peter's got his hand up first. Go on then, Peter.
Unmute myself. I was thinking about Bonnie and Michael, and when you started your presentation, it said not broadcast, and I thought, well, of course it's broadcast. It's a film. And then you carried on, and I suddenly sort of thought, well, it was rather like when television and film first started, when it was actually done live. Drama was done live on the television. It wasn't pre-recorded. So it was one thought that crossed my mind. That's just a comment. But what I found, Bonnie, when you were talking about the whole process of all this happening, I got as excited about the process as I got excited about the actual outcome, because actually there was a hell of a lot of, because one of my questions was, did you rehearse it? But of course you answered that for me. But in a kind of, it was like a sort of, the whole thing seemed like a total improvisation with kind of adjustments. So, you know, and taking the stuff that was there and for it to be in someone's bedroom or here or there or the next place. These are really comments, not so much questions. But I think actually the way you described the process of actually everybody taking part was so exciting. So thanks for that. And similarly with Kelly's production, the live end, I would like to have seen sometimes the white card models perhaps, or something like that. As soon as you showed me the Gate Theatre space, I started to get excited because it started to, only because I'm a theatre designer and, oh, a model, look at it, there's a model. I can start to identify with that, you know, so still sort of using old school kind of eyes. But actually the whole thing of making performance, live performance, yeah, stop, finish, thank you.
Will, next, I think.
Well, it's sort of picking up, and it's actually relating to the question that Christina's put into the chat was about where she's asking you to talk a little bit more about how you involve the audience in the rabbit hole project in particular, and picking up too on what Peter was saying in terms of you know, and that ability that you thrive with a live audience, and how do you also kind of create that the sort of the feedback loop, if you like, that we don't have when everything is recorded and being put out, that both performers but then everybody involved in a live production is so used to kind of feeling the room, sensing the audience, getting that response back, the kind of ways of mitigating for the sort of absence of that. It struck me, and so it'd be great to hear about that, and just also that observation about breaking down the titles, and that all becoming sort of visual designers looking at different aspects, and or not even just visual, because sound design came up. Both Kelly talked about that too, that and we are talking around quite a bit away from, and I know this is going to come up in presentations to come as well, that we're talking quite a lot about lighting and about sound and aspects and video, rather than the sort of traditional set and costume thing. So that's a bit of an observation, and something like I'm sure we're going to come back to. But if you could talk us a little bit more about how you involved audience, that would be great.
So it was one of the things that we started talking about almost right off the top, before the script was even finalized, was how will the audience interact with this material? How much do we want them to interact? And how is the audience sort of created as a bit of a character in this show? Because the concept was streamers and streaming culture, the lens you're looking through and the audience observing, like that observational relationship was already built into the script and the ideas, and we knew we wanted to keep that as part of it. Our video team did I think you saw some of them in the presentation, but sort of video overlays to make it look like people were a certain number of people were watching that stream, and a certain number of people were commenting, like we had a little comment sound that would happening, so that the audience would even though it was clearly built in, like the actors were responding, and it was clearly part of the theatrical frame and presentation, it added an additional element of live idea to the fact that the viewport you're using is an audience portal already. And I think that was an interesting one. We did toy with having the audience able to interact. We had all watched shows where that was part of the presentation, and it was one of the considerations early on in the process. And then we realized that we really did want to maintain the control of the environment. We didn't want it to be an interactive show at that point. But it was definitely a consideration. If we're doing some pre-recorded comments and comments that advance the storyline and give the isolated characters some dialogue opportunities, do we also want actual feedback from the audience? And we realized that within the construct we had created, that wasn't what fit best for the story. But it is one of the things I think we recognized. Production side, we had a continuous communication network. We were less reliant on that audience feedback. For the performers, this was a big hit, realizing that they were still not going to be able to sense that the audience was there, was watching, not being able to hear even just like the intake of breath or the silence when nobody says or does anything. There wasn't going to be that relationship for them. So I think from a performance aspect, that was something that we managed on our clown show, where we just said, hey, we're going to invite a small audience. They're going to be in Zoom. They're going to keep their mics open and you'll hear them clapping and cheering and groaning and things. For this, it really was a very static and fixed environment in that way. What we did do is made sure that everybody who was invited, everybody who bought tickets, everybody who was part of the process understood the liveness, and the occasional thing that did not go perfectly, I think really that's where we did manage to really hook the audience in and understand together that we were holding those stakes in a very equal way. The audience was at sometimes, I think, just as frightened as we were, because they could sense something not quite working and then coming back together, and the collective feeling in the universe, even if you can't have the collective feeling in the room of everyone supporting, and our webpage where people could comment, and watching the Twitch stream to see how many people were watching and seeing the traffic come and go there, were sort of the ways we substituted for the feeling in the room. But production, who could all be on our equivalent of headset Discord together, really did get, I think, that community feeling. And I think that's something that the performers weren't able to experience quite the same way, although the stakes and the positive risk was still very high for them.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't find myself for a moment up there. Any more questions? Anything from the floor that we've not? I know we answered Christina's question, I think, there with really eloquently. Thank you, Bonnie, about the audience. Does anybody else have any questions from the floor? Or
I think Lucy has her hand up, so I will just invite Lucy to unmute herself and put her video on to ask the question.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Michael and Bonnie and Kelly, thank you so much. I was just really fascinated that I want to sort of bring together some of the words you all used. And I'm particularly interested at the beginning, Michael and Bonnie, you said bravery and courage that makes us vulnerable. So I'm interested in how we all negotiated the vulnerabilities that we did. But you explained some of that just now, Bonnie, in a way. You know, different considerations you were talking about. That was really interested me about constantly changing. Do we want it live? How are we going to do it live? And that processing that I think we all had to go through to keep enabling us to answer the learning outcomes of the project, keep our students safe, a whole range of different things. Bonnie, you also said some lovely words: subtract, negotiate, and work within. I really liked that moment when you said those things. But one of the other things I just want to ask is, you said let the students guide tech innovation, and I wondered if you could give an example of that, where you passed the ball to them and said, right, you tell us how you want to do this.
Sure. There were in those early stages when we were kind of discussing with the team and with the artistic team about how the show was going to be, what format it would be, what platform would it land on. In those early discussions, it was partially, from our own thinking and contributions, but a very heavy a point of asking the students to say, where are you watching things? Where are you engaging with media? What do you want to use? What tools are you interested in using? That's where we ended up with Twitch, and Twitch kind of ended up being our main platform of choice for a number of our shows. Not all of them. We still use YouTube for some things, and we had internal Zoom things for some things. But getting onto Twitch and getting onto Discord, both of those really were student-led platforms, absolutely, that we got onto with them early on, and then we've adapted them into our way. For the other project, before the end, we had the students consider, because it always was going to be this kind of choose your own adventure, how have the audience pick their path through a series of pre-recorded things. Students went down the road of designing an entire website backend, and how are they going to host that, and what are the ways of doing that. We finally landed on a different platform, Adventure, that was a paid service that provided a lot of that. But the technological approach for the initial brainstorming was 100% from the students on that. And so it was like, they propose something, we say, great, let's have a look at it. Let's explore it together. Let's see if it works. Does it fit with the kind of things that we're doing? Yes, no, maybe. What would we love to see instead? Is there something else that can meet that? We've tried so many different technologies over the course of the year, from OBS Ninja to Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC and everything else like that. So a lot of that was brought in from them.
And initially it was a little bit terrifying, I think, for everybody. They were looking at us to say, what should we do? And we were saying, that's a super question. We're also interested to figure out what we should do. But once we sort of pulled back and really looked at it in terms of the kind of work we do in a typical world, and when we are in a room together, the only thing that was different was the architecture. And the architecture we quickly established was Zoom and the internet and what people had available to them. We would still be in a theater, everybody sort of standing around and looking around and saying, okay, within the parameters that we've set together, how do you think we should maybe solve some of these problems? And what can you see that might move us to the next stage, or might really support this, whether it's technology or design or even the practicalities of scheduling and format and staffing? Who do we need when, where, how do we make it go together? And so I think, fortunately, fairly early on in this project, at least, we realized that things were entirely different and yet still incredibly the same. We were holding that space and creating the space and safety parameters to say, no, we've got you. There's a net. We've got a lot of support behind this project, but within this, there's a lot of ways to use your theater. There's a lot of ways to present your work. What are some things that you'd like to try, knowing what we're trying to do? And that by the end, we realized that wasn't as different. It was just a big jump for all of us to let go of the desperate planning we had been doing and feeling like we had to have a perfect system for them to come into, and realizing that they were our best collaborators. And they did have that generosity of, we want this to work, you want this to work. We're all so excited by the idea that it could be live, that it could feel like a show. There were a couple moments where we closed our eyes, we were listening to somebody call audio cues on comm, and we went, if you just close your eyes, you don't know you're in your bedroom anymore. This feels like a show. And their willingness to do that with us actually was what we've always wanted to encourage, to explore within what's possible, within what we can try together.
Thank you so much. That's really great to hear. Thank you.
Any more questions from the floor there, Gabrielle? I'm saying the floor, I don't know which floor, but you know what I mean.
I can't see any more questions in the chat. I see Andreas is raising his hand.
Yes, I think it's the time.
So
thank you so much for these wonderful presentations. I've been previewing quite a few of the presentations, as we all did these days, and I have come with a question that I think I'm going to be asking everyone in every single panel. So I would be really, really interested to hear from all three of you. What would you keep from those amazing hybrid practices that we all developed during COVID, if tomorrow morning COVID-19 and the pandemic had disappeared forever, officially? And I think that should be a question we should all start reflecting upon.
I think, shall I go ahead? I'll start. I think actually one of the initial ideas that I had for this module before the pandemic was to do an in-person kind of design showcase, where students would, they'd be set up. If you've not seen the foyer of the new Adelphi building in Salford where we teach, I think it's about 3 or 4 years old, this space, and it's beautiful. It's got a beautiful open foyer. And one of my ideas was to have a big design showcase where students would set up their, their model boxes or, some of their design work. And we'd invite a lot of people to come to our building, and we'd have a big tour, and, it'd be a big kind of industry event. And we were able to kind of replicate that in a Zoom environment. And actually it meant that more people could come, more people from various parts of the world could attend as well, which was great for our students. And the kind of breakout room format of Zoom really allowed for some really kind of in-depth conversations as well, and for the industry people to get to know our students and the other way around. So I think actually I will keep all of the kind of industry engagement stuff that we did on Zoom. So inviting industry professionals to the white card showings, I'll be keeping that absolutely. And doing an online industry kind of design showcase event at the end of term, I will absolutely be keeping that as well.
I'll go next. Kelly, I 100% agree. I think likewise, the opportunity for a diversity of engagement and professionals that our students could meet with and discuss with through this has been wonderful. And we've had the technology before, but no one thought about really using it that deeply. So that we're definitely keeping. I'm interested in kind of from a wellness perspective as well, of just considering, I mean, this might be coming off of the end of a pandemic semester teaching, but does every meeting have to be in person with travel and all that? Like, how much of it can we actually do this way? And look at what we've done this year. Look at the amazing things we've done this way. So let's prioritize our in-person time and things that require a little bit more effort to do for the things that we really want to do in that mode. And let's use whatever technology and whatever tools for the best purpose of that. So if this is a discussion on Zoom better suited for that because someone's away, great, let's do that. So really just prioritizing the people as part of the process, I think is a main takeaway for me.
And I think I'm delighted to hear that all three of us are sort of in that same headspace of there are just times where this made more sense, and we can keep that in and increase. I think in a lot of ways we were in a get through, get done, keep going. We've got some ideas on making things more sustainable or making things more possible for ourselves, for our students, for our colleagues. And as soon as we get through this show, then we'll implement those things. And we were building in small changes as we went, but it really gave us an opportunity to step back and say, where are we being sustainable for ourselves, for everyone else? Where are we being respectful? Where are we meeting people where they are and where they can be, where we have students joining us from all different parts of their lives, systems, and how can we be the most respectful? Some of the things that we were able to do via this platform were have larger teams and be a little more flexible. If somebody said, I'm so sorry, I've got this conflict and I can't move it, we were for the first time ever really able to say, okay, we can work with that, because we actually were working with people's circumstances instead of saying, you're here in our system. And so those 12-hour tech days on site, you will be there for all of them, no matter what. And yes, I know you commute 2 hours, but that's not something that we're taking into consideration. Suddenly, we were taking all of those things into consideration. And I'm so excited to hold that as we go back and say, how can we make sure that this is not just something you survive, but something that really allows you to access it, especially in a learning environment where you're maybe experimenting with a role that you wouldn't be in otherwise. How do we make sure that it is, you are committed, we are committed, but that it's actually possible for you? And I think holding some of those, if you have to jump to 3 meetings in a row, maybe instead of running between buildings, Zoom does make the most sense for us. And how can we make sure we prioritize an in-person activity by having a really solid meeting about how to do it in advance? We're going to hang on to all of that so that we go back better.
Can I just add, I think in terms of the practices as well, and some of the conventions that have developed around performance and design, it's interesting that they are just that, they're conventions, they're not natural. And I think what this has made us all look at is how those things have actually come about, and maybe they're going to get unconventional or whatever, that we're moving into something else now, and we're going to question so many of those things, including those differentials, those job differentials. And that's why I kind of started by wanting to read out your CVs, because of the kind of the multi-interest and the multi-skills that you have. And I think that is kind of one of the things that might we might have to take into the future. The singular discipline is no longer going to be, you know, what the theatre and performance is going to be about. Things are going to kind of open out. Also into the social, which is what Lucy O'Neill O'Neill talks a lot about, the young designer who works at the Gate. That we're moving out. We have a kind of democratic responsibility to move out into beyond these buildings. I think there's some more questions in the chat, and we could have another 5 minutes or so if there are questions. I think
something I'd just like to ask, if I may, which it sort of came when Bonnie was talking about how the architecture is what's changed, and you know, a lot of the practices are the same and the processes are the same, but we're doing them in a different way, and we've understood how much we now can do remotely. We can do even lighting design, and we can do costume fittings, and we can do performances and all these things remotely. But there's an area where I teach at the Arts University in Bournemouth. Our sonographers will also learn scenic arts skills alongside, and it strikes me is one of the areas that has been difficult to kind of scale down to the kind of screen size kind of format that we've sort of had to become so used to over the last 18 months. And in a way, I'd quite like to throw this out to the entire floor in a way, because I depending on what programs, what courses also deliver sort of scenic arts as a particular strand of performance design, you know, are there any, because I've been a little bit stumped as to how that part can be delivered in the same way, or even in any way that is meaningful in terms of those skills that we're asking, you know, we're wishing those students to acquire. So I don't know if there's any thoughts around those areas.
I can speak a little bit to what we did. We actually ran a scenic painting course this year remotely, which was sending materials to students' homes for them to work on. Of course, the scales could be very different, obviously, but some of that was still present. Where we've kind of seen it in this you know, re-understanding of roles is, I come from a projection design background, and the overlap between projection design and scenic design and scenic art is there. It's the same skill set, it's the same design thinking, it's just a different medium. So those students were maybe not thinking about using technology as part of their medium. All of a sudden we're now in those conversations together, and it's you know, maybe it's students working together to like guide, and we're not physically painting, or we are creating things that are analog and then digitizing them and then presenting them that way. Yes, the size of the screen is definitely a factor in understanding of scale and understanding of presence in the environment. But, you know, as we're looking to other things that are beyond the two-dimensional screen, as we're looking for, you know, exploring VR performances and things like that, we're able to gain back that level of scale. And so there's some interest there. You know, we're looking a lot around virtual production right now, and where those skill sets can kind of lead into that. I think, like, yeah, fundamentally the ideas and the design sensibility is similar, and it's just a different set of skills and different medium to explore them within.
I think we've got, I'm just jumping in here. There's a question which I think may have been answered probably for Michael and Bonnie. Well, actually, no, and for Kelly, actually, in the Q&A, asking about access to technology, because it's all very well talking about democracy and democratizing processes, but actually it's obviously dependent on students having access. And I think you talked about supporting students and working at particular times, but did you have that problem, Kelly, of students not having, I mean, it's not even that, is it? It's not having a room to work, you know, or a space they can call their own. So that is a problem, isn't it? I think I'm just interested to know did you have that? Did you deal with it? I think that's the question that's being asked about technology, really, but also I would add space as well.
Yeah, so we were quite lucky actually in that loads of manufacturers actually made their their software either free for students or at a very, very reduced rate, or we were able to get bulk licenses for students. And we were able to kind of send out, the technology to send out the software that way. We also had a virtual desktop that students could log into, so they could log in remotely to a university server where they had access to all manner of things. I think there was something like 72 different programs that they had access to. And actually the learning outcomes from my module were really vague in that way. I think it's something to the effect of engages with appropriate technology or something. So I kind of let them make that choice. So if they wanted to use SketchUp, or if they wanted to use Capture, or if they wanted to use the EOS offline editor, or if they wanted to use, if they had access to AutoCAD or Vectorworks and they wanted to use that instead, I really kind of left it up to them in terms of what they had access to and what they felt most comfortable using, but also what they felt worked best for their project and the best way to kind of, get across their design ideas, in whatever way they felt worked best for them and they had access to.
Anybody else want to come in on that? I'm aware also that time is moving on. There's another question in the chat from Adam, is it Adam Mendelsohn, about the kind of, I think, acting students particularly. We can find Adam if Adam wants to speak and ask his question. Any joy?
Yes, hi, hello.
Hi, Adam.
Yes, hi, thank you for putting this all together. I keep telling my colleagues that we have to come up with a new term for what this is. So I'm not quite sure it's theater. I'm pretty sure it's not television because we've been paid a lot more. And I think it's not film. So I think we need a new term. So that should be our work. My question was really about, this is very new. And like you guys said, it was a little scary, I think, for everyone involved. And one of the things that we were trying to innovate some things and push some technologies and stuff like that. And when that came up, it wasn't so much from the actors who seemed game, but some of our acting directing colleagues is the ones that I was more concerned about, and that like there was this like control between the traditional theater, and I know you guys wrote a play, but I know you did a lot of other things at Ryerson. So that's, I guess, my point. It wasn't much the actors. I mean, their actors are students, right? The students will just, if you teach them well, they'll just run through a wall and there'll be a student-shaped hole in the wall. So, how did you deal with any pushback from your non-technological colleagues?
Good question. I think once we got into the beginning of things, I mean, we were in an interesting situation in that at the same time as the pandemic happening in our school, we got a new director of the acting program. So that was both an incredibly large challenge, but also a wonderful opportunity. And Cole Lewis, who is wonderful, she was very game to work with us and make the best thing happen out of it. And we had some wonderful discussions, and she had some great insight and things too. I think the big part of it was choosing the right guest artists to come in and work with us on these projects. And that was kind of the main thing. All of our pieces were directed by external professionals that we brought in, and it really was choosing the right people to kind of create work, knowing that this was the way that the work was going to be done and created, and that was the kind of buy-in from the get-go. And I think those conversations went well, and the people we worked with were excited to do that as well.
And it was the same systems that we were all experiencing, that our students were all experiencing, right? Is that there are days where you are there and excited and you see hope in the world. I mean, everybody was struggling with the personal parts of pandemic and in the professional parts of pandemic. And I think everyone went up and down and in and out of hope and optimism and fear and despair, and that feeling that we've lost everything, and the feeling that no, it's all still there. We're just going to do it a different way. Mm-hmm. And so it was just holding space with our students, holding space with each other, holding space to have the conversations of what if there were hesitations, if there were moments of, can we do this? How can we do this? Just making sure that we had those conversations and allowed everybody to have that grief and frustration moment of, oh my goodness, I felt so good and so competent at this the way we used to do it. And now I feel like I'm so out of my element, and I'm so much less comfortable with something I know is so fundamentally interesting to me and that I'm so passionate about, and making sure that we figured out what support systems everybody needed individually, in the same way as we were saying to students. Does your internet work? Does your computer work? Can you actually be here on Tuesday afternoons? We tried to say to each other and to our faculty and guest instructors, do you have the things you need? Do you want to run through how to use Zoom another few times? What can we do together to make this feel a little bit more possible? Because we're all just sort of holding on to those connection points right now.
I'm just going to jump in because I think there's another question from the floor, and then I think we probably should break. So let's have one more question.
Thank
if there
you,
is.
Jane.
Yeah.
So it's Toti, and I'm just going to unmute them shortly.
Hello. Is that Jane? Hi, Jane. Hi, Michael. Hi.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Gosh, it's really lovely to feel all the love, because I think it's just been so incredibly difficult for us, every single one of us, this last 18 months. And we're all theatre makers, and we're used to solving problems and responding to difficulties. And I think the way, and hearing that you've done all that, because we've done all that, we've all been doing all that this last crazy period, for the good. It's all just so fantastic and wonderful what you've created, and I see strains of that, you know, all over the world. We've all been doing that and dealing with issues and having the honesty to say, I don't really know what the answers are yet, but let's figure it all out together. And we've empowered them to make decisions and come up with those solutions. And that's been wonderful, seeing all that fantastic work and hard work, a lot of incredible dedicated hard work. It's given them the time and the space this year to solve some of those tech problems and to really learn how to do that on AutoCAD and learn how to do that on SketchUp and make those decisions. It's been so great seeing better quality work come through this year, and it's just really lovely. Thank you very much, Jane, for organising this, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow, and it's lovely to see you all. Thank you from Nottingham.
Oh, that's so fabulous. What a great thing to just end this first panel.